Since we get asked quite often which kind of camera and lens combination we can recommend for wildlife and bird photography, if you rather start with getting into the photography, don't want to spend too much money, and also maybe don't want to carry around these big, large and heavy lenses, we thought we could today discuss about several options. So the cheapest one will start around $2,500 and the more expensive one will be close to $5,000. Nicolas, do you want to start with the cheapest?
So we start with the Z50 Mark II, which is a DX camera, meaning it's a rather small sensor, but it has the advantage that it has, or you can multiply the focal length by 1.5. So with the 28 to 400 millimeter, that extends to 42 to 600 millimeter, which is basically quite a nice range, I would say, for bird photography, or in general, just wildlife photography. So you can choose your composition if you want to have a rather small in frame image or a portrait. It's also quite a light option. So we're talking around 1.2 kilograms. I have no idea what that would be in pounds, but
I will put it in a text in a small box. Yeah.
Yeah. Generally, one disadvantage that you mentioned before when you talked is, yes, it has only an aperture of 4 to 8. So if you're photographing in rather low light conditions, the ISO will be quite high, I would say.
And high ISO on a DX camera means that the image quality suffers a bit more. One thing that you should also consider is that the background rendition will not be super smooth with this camera in some situations. You can get a clean background if it's really far away, and if you are kind of shooting rather small subjects, like maybe even dragonflies or amphibians or hummingbirds, some songbirds and a feeder, then it should be all good. However, if you have larger animals, larger birds that are a bit more in dense vegetation, you will hit some limits here. So I think it's important to know or to decide for you if this is a priority or not.
Generally, I would also say that this kind of setup here is probably more tending towards photography that is during nice weather. So if there is sunlight, if you're shooting around noon, then aperture of 8 should be enough. But also with the extending tubes of this lens, I would say it's not the best option if there is heavy rain, and you would rather put a lens coat on it to protect the lens. But yeah, during sunlight or during sunny conditions, it should be fine.
But this brings us directly to the other option, which is the same camera, the Z52. Combined with the 180 to 600 millimeter f5.6 to 6.3 lens. As you can see, it's quite a bit larger until here is without the lens hood, and also heavier. It's around 2 kilograms, I think slightly above. So quite a difference to this camera and lens together that weighs 1,200 grams. The advantage, as Nicolas kind of mentioned before, is that here you have an internal zoom, which first of all means it's quite easy to zoom in and out, and it's more weatherproof.
Of course, it's also a disadvantage in that sense, because if you zoom out, it doesn't retract. So in the backpack, it's rather on the large side, I would say. But if that's not an issue, then you're probably better off with this kind of lens.
Yeah, you have a bit better image quality, but what is more important to us is that at 600 millimeter you're at f6.3, whereas here at 400 millimeter you're already at f8. So in terms of background resolution, if you would just crop this image a bit more to have the same effective focal length of 600 millimeter, it would look like a f11 image. So that's 2 stops of light or 2 stops of worse background rendition that you have between these two lenses. So I think that's a clear advantage here, and obviously the 600 millimeter, if you use it on the Z50 Mark II, it extends to 900 millimeter, or you get 900 millimeter of effective focal length, which is much better for shy and small birds.
So one other factor that I was kind of thinking about was the autofocus speed. But then I was thinking back to, I think, last year when I went with the 28 to 400 to the Alpine Swift colony. And even with this kind of lens, it actually worked out to photograph them in flight with a busy background. So it's not really an advantage of the more expensive lens in that sense, because it also works with the slower lens in that sense. It's just a matter of setting up the camera correctly, I would say.
Yes, I think both in terms of lens and camera, a lot has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. It was always that the rather beginner lenses or cameras had a really inferior autofocus system, and this changed a lot. As you say, the setup is still relevant, and we actually wrote an ebook that is around 100 pages long that this goes through each menu that is relevant for the autofocus, how we set it up, and how you can maybe tweak it for different kind of situations. As you mentioned, Alpine Swifts are of course challenging, and it's something else if you shoot backlit, if you shoot with the sun in your back, if you shoot maybe during snow. So we wrote this to help you to get the most out of your Nikon Z camera, and it works for all the different camera models.
So then we mainly talked about the Z52 for now, which of course has a DX sensor. So basically the next step would be to go to a full frame camera. So basically the equivalent setup would be the 180 to 600 with the Z52, which is basically on the entry level side for the full frame cameras. So it also has around a 24 megapixel sensor. Of course the Z52 has also around 24 megapixels. But it has a much larger sensor, which just is able to capture a lot more light. So if you're photographing at dawn or dusk, you're just capturing more light and saving some ISO in that sense. And the images look much more cleaner, I would say.
Yes. Maybe one disadvantage of this combination is definitely the price. So we forgot to kind of mention this before. The Z50 Mark II with the 180 to 600 is around $2,800 US. Here we are looking more towards 3,700 or so. And also in terms of weight, obviously once you take the 180 to 600, it's much heavier than the 28 to 40. But now coming to the Z5 II, what I enjoy for some situations is that we have a joystick on the back to move around the autofocus point. I know that you don't use it as much anymore, but we also have a bit bigger battery in the camera. It's in fact the same battery as on the Z6 Mark III and the Z8, and this lasts much longer. From my experience, I would say about twice as long than the battery of the Z50 II. And I also found that differences was the most pronounced when it was rather cold. So when I was taking pictures in winter in the snow, I realized how quickly the battery of the Z50 Mark II drains. So here we would recommend definitely at least 2 spare batteries. Here maybe you can get away with one. Just figure this out, but keep in mind the battery life here is not the best because it's a smaller camera.
One factor in that sense as well is the buttons are a bit larger on the Z5 II. Generally the body is a bit larger, so it's also easier to hold in the hand. But just because of the bigger buttons, especially in the winter, it's also easier if you have some gloves on. You can basically reach all the buttons and you feel them better in that sense. So yeah, it's just multiple factors, especially if you if you like to go even when it's bad weather. The Z5 II, I would say, is the better option.
Yes, and as we mentioned before, the sensor, obviously, we have a full frame sensor, and this just gives us much better image quality, especially if it's rather dark or not so nice weather. And you have less reach, but still these full frame sensors, they hold up better to cropping in general. So with the same amount or almost the same megapixel, you can crop a bit more with the full frame sensor from our experience, just because the image stays sharper and stays cleaner. I think the next step up would be another camera. So we stick with the 180 to 600 millimeter lens, but now we go to the Z6 Mark III, which quite recently got a firmware update. So now it also has the bird eye detection mode, it has auto capture, and it also has this focus limiter that was introduced in the Z8 back in June. And we also covered the focus limiter and the bird eye detection, obviously, in our ebook that we mentioned before. So what's the main benefit of the Z6 III over the Z5 Mark II in your opinion?
In general, I would say it's it's just faster. So it takes more images per second, I think 20 frames per second in RAW. But it also has a faster sensor, so meaning it reads out the pictures more quickly. because it has a semi or a partially stacked sensor, which especially for birds in flight or dragonflies, it's just easier to get them basically the wings frozen without any artifacts or weird.
Yeah, I feel like with this one, it's almost impossible in the electronic shutter. So you would need to go back to the first electronic curtain. And this has a bit the disadvantage that you also have a really visible blackout during the shooting, which makes it then harder to basically follow moving birds. So for action photography, this is definitely much better. We still can see a little bit of rolling shutter. I had this when I was taking like panning shots, that the background, if I had some reeds or some trees, they started to get a bit tilted, but the bird itself had no rolling shutter pattern. So this was definitely welcome. And you mentioned the higher speed, and here the card configuration is also different. We have still the SD card, but also a CF Express Type B card, and they are writing so much faster that you can just keep the high frame rate over a longer period of time. And you mentioned before they're actually cheaper than good SD cards.
Yeah, I would say especially if you go towards like larger cards. So for example, a 512 gigabytes or 1 terabyte card, they're actually a lot cheaper than the equivalent SD cards. Especially if you also take into account that they're way faster. And if you go on trips, I would say it's a lot easier if you just have to take 1 or 2 CF Express cards instead of multiple SD cards, which are slower and more expensive.
One last thing I want to mention, the viewfinder is also noticeably bigger than with the Z5 II. So if this is something you're a bit concerned in going for a mirrorless camera, I think here you will just have the nicer experience.
Yeah, in general, this is almost like the best viewfinder there is in the Nikon system. So it's the highest resolution and also has the broadest color range. So it has a P3 color space. And in general, it's just more close to like a real life optical viewfinder than all the other cameras. But of course, like I said, it also comes quite close to that, I would say.
Yes, which we could just transition to that. So this will be the last camera that we talk about in this like more entry to mid-range level gear video. The Z8 is clearly a professional camera. It is noticeably bigger, also a bit heavier. And you have even more buttons that you can customize. You have the shoulder display that the Z6 Mark III already has as well, that I use a lot because I often have the back of the screen on the Z8 turned off and on the Z6 Mark III tilted inwards to protect it and to save battery. And then for me, the shoulder displays makes it so much easier. What other benefits does the Z8 have?
For me, the main advantage is like the sensor protection, so the protective shield. So if you want to swap lenses and you shut off the camera, it goes down and it protects the sensor from dust or anything from damage. And especially, yeah, if you're out in the wild, it's raining, there's a sandstorm, whatever, stuff is flying around, it's just a lot easier. You have some peace of mind that, especially if you're out traveling and you're in the field somewhere, you can't just clean the sensor easily. It's easier with the Z8. With all the other cameras, the sensor is really exposed. So you have quite quickly some sensor dust on it.
Yeah, in case you notice from other cameras or other manufacturers like Sony and Canon, they allow that the mechanical shutter acts as a sensor shield. But first of all, it's a bit more delicate. And second, this, no matter if Sony or Canon, it always takes 2 or 3 seconds until it goes down. Whereas this on the Z8 is amazing because it's just instantly going down. So you don't need to wait until you can, I would say, swap the lenses safely. Yeah. This is because the Z8 doesn't have a mechanical shutter. It has an electronic shutter only because it's a stacked sensor that is fast enough for basically all situations that we encounter in wildlife photography. And this gives some other advantages. So we mentioned before that the Z6 III is already better than the Z5 II in terms of the rolling shutter. But with the Z8, I think neither of us experienced ever any issues with rolling shutter. And we also have a 45 megapixel sensor, which for me is not the most important reason to upgrade, but it can definitely be nice for some situation, because if you crop the image, let's say with the crop factor of 1.5, you're pretty much at the 20 megapixel of the Z50 Mark II.
Yeah, exactly. But then again, you have the liberty of basically cropping in. So if you have a bird in flight with the Z50, it's generally a bit trickier to get it into the frame, and not that the bird kind of is only halfway in the image, or it already went out of the image. And with the Z8, you have just more space in the frame around the bird. So if you're a bit too slow, you can just crop it afterwards. So you have just more space for your composition in general, I would say.
In terms of price, if we have the 180 to 600 with the Z8, we're around 5,000, 5,200 US dollars. To be honest, we're European based, so we don't have always the exchange rate and everything in mind, and it can also change to a political situation over the months. So I will just put the current price in dollars and in euros in a small box. And before we finish the video, we want to quickly talk about the teleconverters, the tele-extenders that we have here. You can see the 1.4 and the 2 times. What's your recommendation with the two different lenses and the cameras?
So generally, I think we can first like put one lens aside, meaning the 28 to 400, which doesn't accept the teleconverters, just because the last element of the lens is just all the way back to the sensor, and the teleconverter has like this protruding element, which you can imagine just doesn't work out in that sense. So it would basically be across the lenses that we presented, it would be the 180 to 600. And for this lens, I would say it's generally more, or works better with the 1.4 teleconverter, and not really the 2 times, just because the 2 times teleconverter, it takes up 2 stops of light.
You're at f13 on the long end, then.
And that is, especially with the Z50, which has a DX sensor, yeah, you need a lot of sunlight to make it work.
Yes, and the second thing is also keep in mind about the air that you have between you and your subject. So usually we recommend tele-extenders, either if you need to get closer for like small birds, like songbirds or something, that you shoot maybe from 8-9 meters, but it's still not close enough, then a tele-extender is very nice. Or if you want to do take pictures of some feather details, it can be really cool. If you have a deer that is 200 meters away, in most situations you will not gain image quality if you add a tele-extender, just because there is some heat haze, there might be some dust in the air or whatever, so be careful about that. I would also say I would rather use the tele-extender on the full frame options that we presented compared to the DX camera. So I think that's everything for this video. We are planning to do another video for next week where we talk about a bit more expensive options that can offer you either more focal length, faster lenses, or also lighter setups. Actually, if you say you have a bit more money to spend, you want something a bit more, let's say, interesting than a 28 to 400, but you don't want to have a heavy lens. There's also some really cool and quite unique options in the Nikon lineup at the moment, so we want to talk about this. And as mentioned before, please check out our ebook. And if you have any questions regarding the gear that we presented here, please let us know in the comments.